Yeah. So again, our current system is you choose one candidate only. The candidate with the most votes wins. Um, in a simple way, there's obviously a larger voting system with primaries or generals or partisan or nonpartisan, but stripping that all away and just looking at the voting method itself, that's our current system. Star voting is a 5-star ballot. So just how you said, make sure to give this podcast 5 stars. Everyone's done it before. We're all familiar with what a 5-star rating is. With star voting, you just score your candidates from 0 up to 5 stars. And that allows you to show 5 stars for your favorite, 0 for your last choice or choices, and score the other candidates as desired. So you can give multiple candidates the same score if you like them equally. If you leave candidates blank, they receive a 0. And then the way it's counted is super simple. It's just 2 steps. First, you add up the stars and find the 2 highest scoring candidates overall. Those are your finalists. Then you look at the ballots a second time and look at how many voters preferred each finalist. So the finalist that's preferred by each voter gets that vote, and the candidate with the most votes wins.
Can you verify what you mean by preferred in this system?
Yeah, so let's say I'm a classic voter in a classic election, and I give my favorite 5 stars and the other front runner 0. In that runoff, I clearly preferred my favorite. 5 is more than 0. If it's a tighter race, or there's multiple candidates, maybe I gave my favorite candidate 5 stars and the other finalist 4 stars. Well, my vote still shows that I prefer that 5-star candidate because I scored them higher. And in that case, I'm a lucky voter. Either way, I'm going to get somebody that I really do like, but my vote goes to that finalist I preferred. And then, if I'm your typical marginalized voter, maybe I don't like either of the front runners in this election. So between those 2 finalists, I gave them 1 star for my lesser evil and 0 stars for my worst case scenario. With star voting in that runoff, my vote goes to that 1-star candidate, shows that I prefer them over my worst case scenario, helps prevent my worst case scenario. So even though I'm not feeling super represented as a voter, I was able to avoid that candidate or help avoid that candidate who's going to be really toxic and really horrific for people like me.
All right.
So yeah, the first round kind of looks at level of support, like how much do we like these candidates? How popular are they? And then that second round just looks at number of voters. How many people prefer option A over option B and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, from what it sounds like, it definitely seems like a not too complicated method, and for the voter themselves, the what you got to do is something you've been doing your entire life. Like you said, people do 5 stars all the time. You do it all the time when you use an app and get a service done for you, of course. So with
Hmm.
that said, it's the method inherently shouldn't be too complicated for the voters when they're doing it, and you can see how in this local election that we have, or with this current election we have with the Republican candidates, to kind of figure out the Republican primary candidate, how that'll be beneficial, of course. My question is, I've heard someone talk about it when we're kind of narrowing down the candidates for Republican, Democrat, those are important. How would this translate to the presidential election when it's, for the most part, we know the 2 primary candidates and maybe a third party candidate? Does the impact still feel the same when you take it up a level for the federal election?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the reasons that we really like and support star voting is that it is politically viable at every scale. It scales really well. So you've got those 2 rounds of tabulation. They're both counted with just addition. So you can tally any subset of ballots at the local level, whether it's a race for mayor or a race for president. From the voter's side, it's pretty much the same, and from the election official side, it's pretty much the same for them too. So highly secure, highly auditable. In terms of how do we slot star voting into the current political system, in Oregon, which is where I am, the way it would work, and we do have a statewide ballot initiative to do this, is that you would use star voting in the party primaries. So each party in the state runs their primary. You've got the Democratic primary, the Republican Party, the other ones, and you vote for the candidates 5 stars for your favorite or favorites on down to 0. And the winner of each party primary is elected with star voting. So we'd pick our, Democratic Party nominee with star voting, and then the winner of each primary goes to the general election, just how it is now. The states have their party conventions and pick their nominee statewide. And then in the general election, we would use star voting again. So you vote for your favorite candidate or favorite party, 5 stars, and so on. And if you're a voter on the left and you end up having, a Green Party and a People's Party and a Progressive Party and an Independent Party candidate and a Democrat, and they would have traditionally all split the vote, you end up being able to show that you prefer any of those over your worst case scenario. So you get a more representative outcome. And then same thing if you're a voter on the right now. There obviously are a ton of different factions on the right as well, with the far right, alt right, your establishment right, your fiscal conservative, your family values conservative. With star voting, you could actually have each of those parties run a viable candidate and then have the most representative one win if it turns out that the country is voting right.
Okay.
And then we have to add in the electoral college, because presidential elections are the most complicated possible election in our country, obviously. So right now we have the electoral college. That means most states are winner take all. So if Oregon goes blue, which it usually does, then 100% of Oregon's electors would go to the Democratic nominee. And so star voting, it's compatible with all of that. You can just change the voting method itself and leave the whole rest of the system exactly how it is. Or it can be a piece in a larger puzzle of election reform. So voting reform is just one piece. There's also money in politics. There's what do we do about the electoral college? And no matter how we change those other pieces of the system, star voting is still compatible.
So it's good that we kind of determine, its scalability. As you mentioned, it's very scalable at all levels, of course. And I am very curious in like its application so far. But before we get there, you talked about it a little bit with all the third parties. Can you kind of tell the impact of star voting and how it can possibly, or basically just its impact on third parties and how this will change how we view third parties moving forward?
Yeah. So on the local level, which is where I think star voting is most likely to get its traction first, in any race where it's used, it really eliminates, like I said, that electability bias. So if a candidate is popular, and they decide to not run under a major party label, then they would have an absolutely fair shot of winning. And voters honestly can say, I don't need to vote strategically. I'm going to give my honest favorite 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars on down for the different candidates. So that's wildly different. And I think it would break two-party domination pretty quickly in the races that use it. In terms of nationally, if we upgraded our voting method to something like star voting, I think that we would see two-party domination break pretty quickly. But it definitely wouldn't be overnight. One thing that we see as new voting methods are adopted is that there is a bit of a learning curve, obviously. So anytime we're changing the voting method, it's up to us, the organizations behind those reforms, to really make sure that there's inclusive voter education campaigns, that we've got trainings and resources in all of our local libraries, and we've got outreach to all of our local groups, and that nobody's left behind. We've got materials on how to vote in multiple languages, all of that. So that's one piece of the picture. But there's also a bit of a learning curve where people have learned the hard way that it's not safe to vote their conscience, that they have to vote lesser evil. And so I think voters in America especially have quite a bit of PTSD around it. And it would take a minute, definitely a handful of election cycles before people are really convinced that, maybe it is safe to start voting my conscience. Maybe I don't have to vote for the front runner who I think can win. Maybe polling isn't the only thing that matters here. I can actually vote my conscience about the issues.
Yeah, I've said this multiple times. We recognize, because I'm a big advocate that third parties can provide a much needed nuance in the political conversation, and it can force candidates to focus on actual positions versus making themselves look better and the other side worse, and playing the politics game that I'm not a fan of, as we've seen on the certain situations on the Republican primary that's been going on with certain individuals. So I'm a big advocate for it, and I think it can be good for discourse as well. What do you say to the individuals? Because I've had someone say this to me at a different situation in the comment section for one of my clips. What do you say to the people that they're not a fan of third parties because of the fear of a potential radicalization group being implemented into the voting? Maybe even an independent going in there with a radical agenda. What do you say to the people who said that's a viable reason why third parties shouldn't matter?
That's not an argument against third parties. That's an argument against polarizing voting methods. And it's a valid concern. But I think it's a bit of I think we would benefit from changing the framing on that question, because it's not necessarily that we have, radical or extreme or just minority opinions in our political landscape. That's not the problem. The problem is if our voting method is going to find a winner that's wildly not representative of the will of the people overall, or like where our country is at. So star voting has this incredible consensus anti-polarizing feature in that scoring round. Whenever you're letting people score all the candidates and you're incentivizing them to score all the candidates, that scoring round finds the two least polarizing, most consensus candidates in the whole field. And then between those two front runners, it finds the one that's preferred by more people. So it really does a great job of maximizing kind of the majoritarian winner, somebody who is actually preferred by a majority of people, but also somebody who just utilitarian style represents the people at large and the center of public opinion effectively. So star voting is inherently anti-polarizing and wouldn't elect a candidate who is, would be an extremist from the center position. And I think that's something that, takes a little bit of explaining to not be misinterpreted. So the center of public opinion is, I want good food and water. I want a nice place to live. I want my neighbors and my friends and my community to be happy and healthy and have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's kind of the center of public opinion. It doesn't necessarily correlate with like a political centrist or like the political mainstream, or like star voting is completely unbiased. So let's say the majority of people in our electorate are like all about koala bears, then the koala bear party is going to win. Wherever the people are, an accurate voting method is going to find the most representative candidate. And so if that's, in a progressive district, that'll be your progressive candidate. If that's in a conservative district, it's going to be a conservative candidate, but it's not going to be a hateful extremist who is going to be dangerously harmful to the minority voters in that area, because those people still have some leverage. They still have some accountability and can prevent those kinds of really problematic, toxic people from winning, as long as there's a couple of decent options on the ballot at least, or one
Fair enough.
decent option.
Yeah, that's a great response to it. At the end of the day, people kind of know what they want, even if this small percentage of individual. I bring up a name all the time, Nick Fuentes. His group of followers are too small of a minority to even represent the majority opinion that you were talking about in the first place, and that's important in this conversation. But speaking of the voters, I kind of have a two-part question. First part is, if someone decides not to put a star against one of the candidates, will that null that score for that candidate, or will it count as 0 for that candidate? And then the second part is, if it doesn't count as 0, can people manipulate the scoring, having one candidate 5 stars, everybody like 1 star? So curious on your response to that.
Yeah, that's on our FAQ. So blank equals 0, no support. You're not helping that candidate win in any way, shape, or form. And it's really important that a blank equals a 0. That is a question people ask a lot. Because yes, if we count neutral as anything other than no support, then it would have a potential to like bias the election in favor of unknown candidates who have a tiny but passionate base. So yeah, if you want to give support to a candidate, you have to give it to them. It's up to the voter to give out their vote.
Okay. That basically answered my question right there. So I'm curious on what you guys have been doing, like the application. What kind of, you've already talked about certain things you're trying to do to educate the audience. Have you seen it, or are you starting to implement this currently into politics right now? What have you seen with star voting, application wise, in our country?
Yeah, so star voting was only invented in 2014 at the Equal Vote conference that was hosted at the University of Oregon. So it's pretty new. It's one of those things where everyone was kind of like, why didn't I think of that? And the science really had already thought of that. They had already found that a 5-star ballot with a top 2 runoff tested above the rest. But nobody had really like put that into a proposal and put it into one election. You don't have to vote a second time with star voting because your ballot already shows which finalist you prefer. So that was kind of the novel bit of it. And it pretty quickly caught on. It got coined star voting, score then automatic runoff, in 2017. And in 2017, we launched the first ballot initiatives to adopt star voting for real municipal public elections in Multnomah County and Lane County in Oregon. In Lane County, it almost passed. It made the ballot and it got 48% of the vote. But voters in Eugene, Oregon, which is kind of in the middle of the state, a majority of those voters actually did vote yes. So we expected to be pretty well obliterated because this was a brand new grassroots project. We had the science on our side, but we didn't have a great website or infrastructure to even convey the message. At the time, we didn't have any funding. We didn't have a campaign manager for parts of the time. So the fact that it almost passed its first time out the gate, I think, was incredible. And we saw organizations adopting it as well. So it's been adopted by a number of political parties all around the country now. It was used for the Independent Party of Oregon's statewide primary in 2020. And it was used to elect Oregon's presidential delegates to the Democratic National Convention in 2020 as well. So some big stuff. And then the pandemic hit. We had some ballot initiatives that ended up getting backburnered because it wasn't safe to canvass. But this year, we really hit the ground running, launched a statewide Star Voting for Oregon ballot initiative, and then a Star Voting for Eugene, Oregon local ballot initiative. And that was an incredible undertaking. In Eugene, they only give you 100 days to collect the signatures, which we were able to do successfully against all odds. There were a lot of forces that made that harder than it should have been, but we got it done, turned them all in October 2nd, and just got verification that we had way more than enough. And this will be up for a vote for adoption in its first public municipal election next May for Eugene voters. And then best case scenario, we pass it in Eugene, leverage that as kind of a 1-2 to catapult it onto the statewide stage for Oregon. And then hopefully it'll be on the ballot for November statewide as well. And they'll say, oh, wow, Eugene already voted yes. We want to vote yes too.
Okay. Definitely seems like some positive direction from what it sounds like, of course. My question, other than, people not liking change, because that tends to be, the thing for a lot of very different solutions that are being implemented. Do you think there's any other reason why the state or why different individuals would deny star voting and would not want star voting being used as the voting method of choice?
Fear of change is one of the more common reasons we get for not supporting star voting. And often that ends up being like, oh, wow, that's a big deal. I want to do some more homework on that before I sign the petition or before I endorse or that kind of thing. And what we find is that those people who actually do put in the work to research voting methods and to get into the weeds a little bit become really passionate star voting supporters. So don't take my word for it. Definitely dig into our websites. Equal.vote is the Equal Vote Coalition website, and starvoting.org is the star voting website. There's a ton of great content there. But yeah, what we find is that people, once they dig into star voting, become really excited about it. And I think it really does sell itself. In terms of other reasons for people to oppose it, the biggest one that we're really running into, or the biggest two, I should say, are number one is status quo believers. So the current system is working for me. I got elected under this current system and I have all this power. And why would we want to change it? Because it's working for me.
Right.
I think those people, even the worst of them, are like a little embarrassed to be making that, to be arguing on that foundation, because obviously the current paradigm is not working for most people and on every level all around the world. There are massive real problems. So I even think the people making that argument don't necessarily believe it. It's, again, like fear of change.
Right.
But the other thing that we're really running into, and that I think is really difficult to deal with, and that is really a huge challenge for our movement in this moment in history, is ranked choice voting. So earlier you had kind of said, ranked choice voting is maybe at least better than the status quo, right? And it definitely has the most name recognition. So if it is better and it's the easiest thing to get past, then why wouldn't we just do that?
Right.
And so, unfortunately, I no longer think that ranked choice voting is better than the current system. I
Okay.
think it's deeply problematic for our movement and has serious issues that when I first got involved, the science has been warning about the issues with ranked choice voting, with wasted votes, with requiring centralized tabulation, with super non-transparent and wonky details for how it's actually counted. All of that was known, but in the last couple of years, we've had real scaled elections that have really run into huge issues that were predicted. And we've seen a wave of backlash against ranked choice voting that should give everybody pause. So it's been passed in a bunch of places. It's also been repealed in a bunch of places, and it's now been banned in 5 states. And it's already not constitutional in about half the states. So that is a huge deal. If we're trying to upgrade our voting method nationally, which is what we need, throwing all of our eggs in a basket that we know has holes in the basket, the eggs are falling out as we walk. It's a short-sighted and kind of dangerous political strategy. So in terms of deal breakers, for me, ranked choice has a couple. So the first one is that it's not safe to vote for your favorite. So same as our current system, with our current system, if you don't think your favorite can win, you should vote lesser evil. With
Right.
ranked choice voting, most people do vote honestly, and there isn't a super clear strategic incentive to vote dishonestly. But if you don't strategically vote for the front runner who actually is viable, it can seriously backfire on you, and it can actually be worse than if you hadn't voted at all. So that's something that we actually saw play out on a statewide election in Alaska, where voters were told it's safe to vote your conscience. They did so. There were 2 Republican candidates running against 1 Democrat, and 60% of voters preferred one of the Republicans. The system eliminated the kind of centrist Republican first, even though it turned out, if you looked at all the rankings, he was preferred over both of the other candidates. So it got this super sideways outcome and massive backlash because of it, because it elected the wrong winner. And yes, our current system does that all the time too. But even worse, it made a bunch of promises to people about it's safe to vote your conscience. If your favorite can't win, your next choice will be counted. It elects a majority preferred winner, and things like that are just objectively false. And advocates knew it was false. They spent millions of dollars on talking points that are lies and got their asses handed to them. So that is deeply problematic. If we as a movement have to pass our reforms by lying to the people and spending millions of dollars, like, Nevada recently passed ranked choice voting. They spent, I think, $23 million on that of out-of-state money. And they sold it with pretty much unilaterally false, oversold, or misleading talking points. And these are talking points that are really inspiring to people. These are talking points that we really need as a nation. So I think it can't be understated how dangerous it is to have the potential for real reform that actually does do all of those things, but then throw millions of dollars of lobbyist money and the national movement behind essentially a greenwashed version of voting reform that will make people think that we've solved the problem when statistically it really doesn't do much.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize how problematic ranked choice voting seems to be. At the very least, you could definitely say that because of the, I guess you could say, image problem of ranked choice voting, because of the false promises that you were referencing and its inefficiencies as well, it already starts a bad precedent when another voting method is trying to be introduced, saying, and people can easily use the excuse saying this one didn't work, this one's not going to work either. So I could definitely see the problems with that. Of course, with ranked choice voting, is it for what you found from the negative things and its bad implementation? Is the movement of ranked choice voting dwindling, or is there still a strong advocacy of ranked choice voting trying to get passed in the country?
Both. They really have the vast majority of the funding and the infrastructure. The organization Fair Vote has been working on ranked choice for a couple dozen years now, couple of decades and more, actively in the modern era, and it goes back 150 years. So they have a huge head start, and I don't want to I don't want my criticisms to be taken the wrong way. The ranked choice voting movement really has built the movement that we need in this country, and they've done that through hundreds of thousands of hours from hundreds of thousands of people who've put in time and advocacy and activism on this cause. So our movement is their movement is our movement. And I want to honor and credit the people who've put in that work. But at this point in time, I think we're seeing real world elections really disproving some of these false claims. And so we are seeing a lot of people disillusioned who, have been and were ranked choice voting supporters for years, like myself. And so I think we are seeing their kind of monopoly on the movement dwindling in a massive way. At the same time, we're seeing some of their funders kind of balk at the new polarization around it, the backlash that we're seeing. I think funders need to take a double take and say, is this really the reform that we want to put all the money in, or should we be funding better voting methods, plural, or should we be really setting up a research committee to research what is the best voting method that we should be funding? Because, it's November leading into the end of the year. It is giving season. So anyone out there who's about to donate millions of dollars to ranked choice voting, I would recommend them to hold on a second. And I think despite that, there is still massive momentum for ranked choice voting, and it's kind of headed towards a cliff. So the CEO of Fair Vote, who founded that organization, has recently stepped down.
Okay.
I'm interested to hear more about why, but the timing of him stepping down right after 5 states banned it and after this notorious failed election in Alaska, where the majority preferred or where the candidate preferred over all others lost, where the loser was preferred by a majority over the winner, and other sideways outcomes. And then that's happened in smaller elections too. That's just the highest profile one that we've seen. It seems like a strange time to step down, unless it's a bit of a referendum on the way that he's been leading this movement, which I think has been really problematic.
I definitely hear what you're saying. It's definitely it's interesting insight. I heard already that ranked choice voting from you guys was negative, but to see that it's problematic in ways that I couldn't have thought of. I am curious though, is there a possibility for the movement of ranked choice voting to just transition or evolve, maybe is the better word, to the other method that you're referring to, ranked robin, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of use that as their pillar moving forward, a better version of what we're already doing? Would that be a possible way for this movement to continue their momentum and hold on to all the resources they already have?
Absolutely. And that is exactly what the ranked choice voting movement should do. Just drop the choice and call it ranked voting, because ranked choice voting means instant runoff voting. It's like this exact specific type of ranked voting that has been known to be super problematic for over 100 years. The science has been like, don't do it. Actually, the inventor was like, don't use this for real elections, but how about this cool idea? So it was never intended to be the proposal that it's grown into. And ranked methods where they do count all the rankings, or really any voting method where they count all the ballot data, those are just better methods across the board. If voters are putting down their vote, you should count it. That's kind of voting reform 101.
Fair enough.
For anyone who I lost with going too far in the weeds. But do I think ranked robin is the future of voting reform? I wish it was. So the ranked robin is one of dozens of systems that fall under the Condorcet voting family. And that's any voting method that counts all the rankings, that elects the candidate preferred over all others, if there is one. And if there isn't one, goes into like a kind of a tie-breaking protocol to find the most preferred candidate out of the rest. And there's dozens of ways to do that kind of tiebreaker if there's kind of a three-way rock, paper, scissors tie. And so the Condorcet voting movement has been pretty like there isn't a consensus about which is the best of the Condorcet methods. And so there just isn't really any traction or political momentum behind that. That's something that we as the Equal Vote Coalition have been trying to change. So ranked robin is our proposal. It's not really a new idea. What it really is the simplest of that umbrella of like that family of voting methods. And really any of them would be fine. It's more of a failure to kind of like market and brand a good system and have consensus around it and advocate for it cohesively than it is a fault of the system. So yeah, ranked robin, tell your friends about it. If you're like sold on ranked ballots and star voting, you don't like the way a 5-star rating feels, absolutely go to bat for it, champion it, we'll help you. But in terms of viability to be adopted all over the world or all over the country, we do think star voting has a better path to implementation. And so it is a bit of a pragmatic thing to say. So star voting is simpler to tally. It's simpler to explain, especially if you want to explain it fully and not gloss over, the details.
Right.
So with star voting, it's just addition. You add up the stars in the first round, and then in that automatic runoff, you add up the votes. So that's super simple, super transparent. Whereas to actually report results for like a ranked system in which, there's like a rock, paper, scissors tie, or candidate A is preferred over B is preferred over C is preferred over D, and that just becomes really complex as soon as you start looking at an infographic. And so for voters, I think that the super short pitch is great, but the longer pitch is a bit derailing.
Right.
And then political viability, most states in the country have clauses in their election law that's like the candidate with the most votes wins, or things like that. And there's about 7 of them that we've identified that, depending on how they're written, they might make one alternative voting method or another illegal. And star voting just naturally complies with election law all over the country. It has that built-in top 2 runoff. So anywhere that requires a top 2 runoff, it complies. In that runoff, your vote automatically goes to the finalist you prefer. So each ballot, each voter counts as one vote ultimately. And so that complies. Ranked robin does not comply with that last one. So it would require constitutional amendments in a bunch of states. And star voting ensures that you have a majority preferred winner between those 2 finalists. So of all voters who had a preference between those finalists, you're going to get a winner that was majority preferred. So that's the best really you can get in terms of ensuring a majority preferred winner whenever possible. And that's something that a lot of election law requires. And a lot of election law also requires a plurality winner, which is just not a majority. It's the candidate with the most votes wins. And again, star voting, I think I already said that one, but it does comply. So as an activist who doesn't just do the nonprofit side of the work, who does the ballot initiative side, this work that we do is so difficult, even with a method like star voting that's already totally legal, that's simple to explain, that going with a voting method, knowing that the road to implementation at a large scale or a national scale would be that difficult. It's like, let's go with something that we can actually do.
So these are a lot of great points that you're bringing up, of course, and we've talked a lot about star voting, and all the positives. Of course, it's pretty easy to understand, pretty easy to do, pretty easy to implement for the most part. Very scalable, as we spoke about. It represents your wants for a candidate. It is a very powerful option for third parties and their growth. A lot of great things when it comes to star voting, and I personally think so. If someone is listening or if someone is watching and they see all these great things referencing star voting, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, I want this system in my state or in my, town. I just want this system because it's just better. How are these people able to kind of be involved? How are they able to kind of support the cause?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, so we're a grassroots organization. If you go to either starvoting.org or equal.vote, either of those websites, and hit that sign up button, it will let you put in your information. You'll get an invite link to our Slack workspace. We have a kind of online space where we do all of our volunteer coordination. So we'll connect you with action items, connect you with like-minded volunteers and other people in your area, and get you plugged in directly. So definitely go to the website, check it out, hit that sign up button. Especially if you want to volunteer, or even if you have questions. Like if you're watching this podcast and you're like, okay, that made sense, that other point made sense, but I don't know about that one thing she said. hit that sign up link, go to our Slack space. We've got a voting questions channel where you can type your question and you can be the naysayer and have that debate. And our team will like get you the information to answer your questions. So
right.
I would say no matter how you want to be involved, there's a place for you. And definitely if you want to donate, that's always helpful too. And you can do that on either website as well.
All right. Well, I think this was a very interesting conversation. Like I said, I was already kind of a fan of star voting, but a lot of what you said is even gives my stamp of approval even more, to be honest. And it's something that I do bring it up anytime I'm talking about elections, that there are ways that we can kind of have a more representative candidacy moving forward if we really want to, and most people do want to at the end of the day. The biggest thing for these situations, from my opinion, that is the most important is just getting the information to them, because nobody really thinks about alternate voting methods. Nobody even knows what star voting is. So these people don't know that they don't like how things are. They just don't know how they can create a better way to adhere to their wants, of course. And I think that's important. So if you're listening, obviously spread the word, tell people about star voting. All the links will be in the description. Do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
I definitely want to say thank you for having us on your podcast and for having a podcast that really does challenge, the idea of the two-party system and the political paradigm that we're in. It doesn't have to be this way. We can level the playing field. We can empower voters. And I think we can get more representative elections and legislation and a better world. We've just never had a voting method that does that. So it's one of those issues where the devil's in the details. If we are going to change our voting method, we owe it to voters to get it right. So for people who do care about this kind of thing and who do want to nerd out, I really encourage you to lean in. There are a million good causes out there that deserve your time and energy, but this is the one that has, I think, the biggest possibility of really unlocking systemic change on every other issue we care about. So if you're a strategic volunteer and you really want to make a difference, for me, that's why I picked this cause. I really think it's the keystone that will unlock our ability to be effective on every other issue.
I'm definitely there with you. And people, obviously, a lot of moderates are very salivating on the idea of like, oh, I can actually vote my conscience. People who are part of a third party, of course, but people on the left and right, Democrat, Republican, also, I'm sure you guys thought of many of times that you wanted to vote in a candidate that was more representative on who you are. Think of the Republican primary. Maybe you were a fan of, Nikki Haley right now, even though we know more than likely Donald Trump is going to win the primary. But maybe something like this can maybe put her in for you. Or if you were fine on the left before RFK decided to run independent, maybe even though Joe Biden's gonna be that guy, but maybe you want to get your your approval. You want to get your support to him, of course, in the election. This helps all sides at the end of the day, because voting matters. Voting's important, and we want to have the best people in office. The best way we do that is to have a voting method that best adheres to the people we want in the government and politics. So hope you guys enjoyed the podcast episode. Rate it 5 stars, of course. Support star voting. All the links are in the description below. Y'all have a good one.